Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you do listen to this podcast, and hello to our live audience. My name is Stephen Adubafor. I am the events lead for the Ethnic Diversity Network in Openreach, and I'm very proud to present to you this live podcast during the holy month of Ramadan that we are discussing with our colleagues within the business. I've got four amazing guests with me on the panel today, and we're going to be talking about the specific topic and subject of fasting. All the nuances. We've got two people who are experts in the scientific field as well, so we're going to be getting some of those aspects of the discussion, but also two people who very much experience fasting in its entirety, especially during this holy month, but also those of us potentially in the audience who experience it at different times of the year as well. So all the little nooks and crannies, the tips and tricks, everything we kind of need to know in the realm of fasting, we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, I'll introduce our guests on the panel. So I'll just go as you appear on my screen. So I'll start with Dr. Richard Caddis. Just a little intro on yourself.
Thank you, Stephen, and good day to everybody. I'm Dr. Richard Caddis. I'm our Chief Medical Officer and Director of Health and Wellbeing. I look after all of our sort of health and wellbeing support services, guidance, and work closely with the operational business safety leads within Openreach and the people networks, and it's a pleasure to be on the session today.
Thank you, Dr. Caddis. Amazing to have you. And then also Dr. Adam Collins. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Adam Collins. I'm an Associate Professor of Nutrition at the University of Surrey, and I have an interest in intermittent fasting in particular. That's an area of research that I have done and continue to be doing at the moment with the PhD students and beyond that I have here at Surrey. So good to be here.
Amazing, great to have you on as well, and welcome to Openreach as well. Actually, pleasure to have you. Mariam, you're next on my screen.
I don't think my credentials are as high as the doctor's, but yeah, I'm Mariam and I'm a cabler. I work on F&D and Ethernet as well.
Amazing, welcome. welcome. Knows to hear from Mariam later, I'm sure. And last but certainly not least, Asim, welcome.
Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. I'm Asim. Managed to get my background to work in the end. I'm a desk professional at Openreach, so I work as part of Openreach technology in the data tribe. And yeah, I've been fasting for the last week or so, so really excited to have this discussion with everyone. And yeah, thank you all for joining.
Amazing, thank you so much. So yeah, just to kick our discussion off actually with I guess Mariam and Asim, with you guys specifically in the month of Ramadan that we're currently in, about like just under a week that we've begun. How has it been for you specifically this year, but how in general have you guys found fasting as you kind of gone through the years of kind of doing it? Maybe I can start with Mariam.
Well, I've been doing it for over 10 years now, so it'll be maybe my 13th, 14th one maybe. But Asim will probably remember when we were younger, they were fast for a lot longer, and they weren't open till after 9 o'clock. So this year I'm not struggling as much because they open a lot more sooner, but around about 6:30. So yeah, and as with work, I've been all right with work. It's just some working. I'm a cabler. Most of the time we're pulling like 100 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters of cable at a time. You get really dehydrated. But yeah, and then it's just trying to fit everything in such a short space of time, because you've got your prayers and then coming back from work, and then you've got your evening prayers, and then opening your fast, and you've got your 2-hour prayers after that. It's just trying to fit your normal routine and daily activities in with fasting at the same time as well. And then whatever hobbies you've got, or like I go gym for instance, and I do train a lot, and it's trying to just pace yourself and make sure you're not overexerting yourself while you're fasting as well.
Yeah, you highlighted a couple of really good points, and those are some of the kind of intro points we touched on. If you haven't seen it already, we did like an introduction to kind of Ramadan kickoff call about a week or two ago as part of the EDN, and that's where we sort of highlighted, I guess, the structure and some of the nuances of Ramadan specifically, which Mariam started to touch on as well, with the prayers and the different kind of challenges we've even had with like facilities within the business and things like this. So definitely want to signpost if you haven't already kind of caught that as well from the EDN, but yeah, definitely resonates with a lot of what Mariam was speaking about just there. So thank you so much, Mariam. And Asim, yourself?
Yeah, I was going to say very similar. I mean, like Mariam said, I've been fasting for as long as I can remember, really. I think when you're younger, obviously it's seen as such a huge thing. You're taking out, a big part of your life, food and drink. And as you get older, it's kind of like one less thing to worry about. I think on our knowledge call, I think it was summarized really well. It's seen as like an extension to our lives rather than when we take something away. So we're supposed to assume all of our normal responsibilities, all of our usual activities throughout the day. So like you say, it's, again, we might speak to this a little bit later on with doctors. I don't know whether anyone else on the call has found the same, but you often have a bit of a more of a focus with your day-to-day tasks, simply just the fact that you're not always thinking about food. An hour before lunch, you're not thinking about your sandwich, you're not thinking about the walk you're going to take to the sandwich shop. It's kind of out of your mind, so you've got sort of that extra hour in your day where you're just focused. So that's one difference I found, especially in the world of work. I think especially biggest thing for me at the minute has been, I'd say, dehydration. I would say it's slightly different to Mariam. She's out on her feet most of the day, doing lots of physical activity, whereas for me it's sat in front of a screen. But nonetheless, you still feel the same levels of dehydration. That in itself is quite tiring, I'd say, just staring at a screen. So yeah, that's the biggest impact I've found so far, and obviously the impacts to your sleep, having to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and stuff your face full as much food as you possibly can. I think that the scientific or gym term is carb loading. But I don't think when we're half asleep that's kind of what we're looking to do. But yeah, I'd say it's been a really interesting start to the month, especially with it being a lot earlier than in previous years, like Murray mentioned. 3 or 4 years ago we were fasting until about 9:30, nearly 10 o'clock it feels like. So these ones have been slightly different. It's been a case of simply coming back from work in the evening and scrambling around trying to find something to eat. So it's been pretty rushed, I'd say, in terms of how it fits in with your working day. But yeah, that's how I found it so far. So yeah.
No, thank you, Asim. Yeah, some really amazing points that you touched on as well, with some of the differences, but also like some of the kind of nuances to like this year specifically with fasting and stuff as well. So yeah, thank you. Well put. I wanted to bring in Dr. Collins as well to the discussion, because I know you've had or you've done like an article, no less, but also had some different kind of research studies and like kind of opinions on like fasting as a specific topic, some even relating to our Prime Minister, no less, who's also shared like sort of his fasting kind of routine. So I guess where like your kind of opening, not argument, but kind of opening piece on like fasting itself as a topic, and some of the kind of deep dives that we spoke about offline as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously we're talking about Ramadan, which in a way is probably the earliest documented form of what we now coin intermittent fasting, which covers a variety of different ways in which people are fasting, not continuously, but on and off. So what a lot of people think of initially when they think of intermittent fasting, where it came to the sort of forefront of people's minds, was when you had things like the 5-2 diet, where you're fasting for a whole day or eating very little for 24 hours, or technically 36 hours, and you're doing that 2 days out of 7. But I suppose Ramadan is an example of probably a more popular one nowadays, which is what we call time restricted eating, or sometimes time restricted feeding is another term for it, where instead of you having a whole day of fasting, that you're extending the fast within a 24-hour period. So you're basically shortening your eating window and extending the period where you're not eating, which is that giving your body a chance to sort of spend more time in that fasted state. And that's essentially what Ramadan is, because you're basically shortening that eating window to just the period from sunset to sunrise, which means that you're spending more of your time in that sort of non-eating state, or in that fasted state. That sort of not the form of the modern way of doing time restricted eating, where you're flipping it round the other way because you're fasting overnight and then you're restricting your eating window during the day. So there are clear differences there in terms of when in the day you're doing that fast, which to some extent has an impact on your biological clock, your circadian rhythm, which is designed to be active during the day and inactive at night, because we're diurnal animals rather than nocturnal like some animals. We're designed to be active during the day. And I suppose that's what, as you've described, some people find a struggle during Ramadan, because of course you're active during that period where you're supposed to be, where you're fasting during Ramadan, which sort of goes against your normal biological clock. But it's not to say that you can't manage it. It's just that if you were going to design an intermittent fast for the modern times, you probably wouldn't choose Ramadan. You would choose the form that exists at the moment, where you're fasting overnight. That's more user friendly, more in keeping with people's normal daily living. So I don't know if that gives you enough of a snapshot of it to try and segue between that and Ramadan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of, like, what's the word, sort of specifics to, I guess, the structure that Ramadan kind of like gives a Muslim, like, kind of colleagues and friends to be able to, I guess, operate within their days, but also, like, of course, as Asim and Mariam have already mentioned, like, I guess the mental and the spiritual side of it, how, like, for example, like, you could actually end up being more focused at work because you're not having the distractions of, like, food and other things like this, or like clock watching and things like this. I think I really wanted to get into the specifics of, like, I guess, what people are eating when they do eat, and then, like, I guess the effects of that. For example, so us and Maren might be able to touch more on this, but like in the evenings, after the fast is kind of broken, like often Muslims observe Tarawih, which is like kind of the long prayer towards the evenings. And then if you're like breaking your fast, then I guess what kind of, I mean, could have just started Mariam and asked him to be like, what kind of foods do you guys kind of eat? But then also from our two doctors, like, what would maybe be like a recommendation to say, once you have broken your fast and you're about to engage in something that is quite, I guess, physically strenuous, then what kind of food should you be like looking for, or like kind of a bit more ideal to eat in that space? So yeah, maybe we can start with maybe ask him and Mariam from your experiences of like what you actually do and like how you think it affects you.
Mariam, do you want to go first?
If I'm honest, I don't really have, when I'm fasting, I don't really have that much of an appetite. So I'm mainly like, I love my fruits and bit of salad and dates and stuff. But I'm not really like, when it's coming to open my fast, I don't eat a lot of food because you've passed that hunger stage. So I'm more dehydrated and I'm more drinking a lot of water or like orange juice. But the food is like fruit, or sometimes absolutely love my samosa. So I'm making samosas every other day. But yeah, and all that. Pasties, I make chicken pasties, and then grilled chicken with rice and just stuff like that mainly. So I try to keep away from things that are going to be like too salty or just going to make me more thirsty, because then obviously we've got our 2 hour prayers after that, and then I've got to make sure I'm not drinking a lot before I'm praying, because then I'm going to keep running to the loo every time I'm praying. But after we've done our prayer, that's more, I try and like hydrate a lot more after I've done my prayer. So around about after 10 o'clock, after that time is mainly more drinking rather than having food.
Yeah, do you know what? I'll echo exactly the same thing. I think for me, it often gets to a point in the evenings when the last thing you want is food, and it sounds really quite counterintuitive because you haven't eaten the whole day, and you get to a point in the evening, you've had a few dates, you've had some fruit and water, and you're like, you know what? I can't stomach any more food. And it doesn't make any sense. I think that really leans into what Stephen was speaking about with our evening prayer, the Tarawih. I don't know whether anyone has experienced it before, but it's usually in a dimly lit room full of about 150 people, and it's incredibly warm, and it's the perfect sleeping conditions. So you can imagine if you've had a big slap up meal beforehand, you're not best placed. for that. So that's one thing often you've got to be a little bit conscious of, is obviously it's all well and good. Usually if you go to a house where there's loads of samosas and loads of curries and lots of food being made, you know, the temptation is there, but with an eye on the tarawih, you've also got to like kind of be a little bit conscious of that. So that's one thing I found interesting. Like Mariam said, the main one is getting your hands on some water or some milk. I find milk, I don't know if there's some scientific reason behind that, but I find milk especially helps during Ramadan, milk and yogurt. So I try and have a lot of that, especially in my pre-dawn meal. So I have some yogurt with lots of fruits, and that works for me. But like you say, some people have big slap-up meals in the morning. I don't know how they're able to sleep afterwards, but yeah, that's just me. And like you say, it works differently for other people. So that's my experience.
But what's really helped me in that way, I have I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a drink called Nocco. It's BCAA, and I found that's helped me a lot. You know, especially before going for Tarawih as well. It's got it's sugar free and it's caffeine free as well, but it's really, really good.
Is it like a pre-workout?
Yeah, so you usually, yeah, you can have it before training, but I like the drink anyway. I think it's elderflower and something else, but it's really, really good. It helps me quite a bit. That does.
No, one to note down. Thank you for sharing, Mariam. And Dr. Caddis, I wanted to bring you in as well, just on your initial thoughts on like our discussion so far, and like some of the nuances of like what specific foods are like potentially even recommended, or like some of the effects that they could or couldn't have, especially what Mariam and Nassim have shared already.
Well, I'm pleased to see Adam writing a few notes, because I think there's a couple of really excellent things that I'm keen to hear from him around as well, particularly around some of those drinks and the milk versus water. But I think you've both touched on, I think, one of the critical elements around sort of, you know, work fitness and good work and good health, which is the element of dehydration. And, you know, managing that hydration, as you've said, Mariam, around not drinking too much too quickly, and then, you know, needing to go to the loo a lot. And we know that's a challenge in field engineering anyway, outside Ramadan. But you know, I think the key is that fine balance. We know that dehydration and alertness and productivity are affected. I'll come on to the work considerations in a wee bit, because I don't want to overplay that stuff a bit early. But there's, you know, I think the hydration element is one big factor, and again, Adam might be able to talk around some of the evidence behind that. I think the other thing is as you say, not having that big carb load and dip. And I know Adam's done a lot of work with athletes around the optimum way of feeding. And I know when we've had Sally Gunnell and a few other Olympians, and they talk around how the diet is managed and how it changes. I think they're the highly processed stuff and the salty food, as you found, Mariam, is also something that we tend to try and recommend to avoid. And I think, Asim, you've probably got some of those, you know, sort of golden nuggets that Adam might share with us in a few minutes on, you know, sort of how to manage the optimum way of managing those restricted eating windows. If we go into the science mode of how do we manage restricted eating windows, and how do we get the most out of them, and what is some of the evidence behind some of the stuff that you've found effective, and what might we know, Adam, around, you know, the sort of impacts of carb loading and timings and things, if that makes. Just 4 questions plus the other 2 that you wrote down.
Just before. No, Adam, please, yeah, we can segue to you whenever you're ready, just on your initial, kind of thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, obviously hydration is a key thing, and you've got such limited opportunity that in a way, if you were going to sort of prioritize things, that should take a priority beyond food. So I think both of you have experienced that and almost strategized that yourselves anyway. But yeah, there's an interesting thing about the fast, because you've basically got how you're going to top and tail that fast, from sunset through to sunrise. And what was interesting, and one of the things that I wrote down was, I think it was Asim that said that you don't feel very hungry in the evening and you don't feel like you can eat a lot of food. I know you've got to do prayer and maybe you're more thirsty than hungry, but I suppose one of the dangers that you would hypothesize would be people would just overeat as soon as the opportunity came, that they would just hammer it and start to eat as much as they possibly can, or overindulge as soon as the sun sets, when they can break that fast. And there's some science to say that, again, going back to your biological clock, because you're sort of eating at the wrong time, that your appetite regulation doesn't necessarily work as effectively at that time of night. So that increases the risks further of you choosing those highly palatable, those sugary, fatty snacks and drinks and all the things that are treats that you may crave more in that evening. So the fact that you said that you weren't hungry at all is interesting, because that's a good thing, because one of the things that you could suggest is that maybe be a bit mindful of what you're going to be doing to break that fast in the evening, because of the time of day and because of the dangers of maybe overindulging, but perhaps the fact that the way in which you can handle that is not ideal because of when it's happening, and perhaps not necessarily carb loading, but perhaps maybe gear up towards what you're going to be eating just before the start of the next fast. It's almost like planning ahead to sort of fuel yourself for what's coming in your whatever you need to do whilst you're fasting the next time, which could be carb loading as in a sense, but it's basically thinking of that as the fuel for the day that's going to get you through to the next time, where you can not just eat but drink as well. So that's again a hydration strategy that might mean that you change the way in which you're drinking as well across those meals, or across that fasting period.
Adam, is
You
there any sort of evidence that if you drink a lot, it staves your hunger? Because obviously you're filling, from the science, you're filling your stomach. The
yeah
receptors are going to say, "I'm full," but of course there's then no activation of the gut hormones. Not to make it a biology lesson, but I'm just curious if, as Azam said, if you're not hungry and you're not getting nourished, and you're taking a lot of water on, which you need because you've not. Is there anything that is that something that people can learn, or that there's any better approaches? Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe plain water is not the way to go, because the problem with drinking, and it's like what you mentioned there, like drinking lots in one go, particularly if it's plain water, that takes quite a lot of physiological handling, particularly after a period where you haven't had anything. So having something like milk, or having that water alongside some food items, doesn't have to be a meal, but could be samosas, could be fruit, could be something that you're having that fluid with, would of course mean that you are able to cope with that and absorb that fluid more efficiently. And like you said, in terms of hunger, you're not giving yourself false fullness, because actually you're triggering your gut hormones, because you've got presence of other things, not just the fact you've distended the stomach with fluid, that's obviously feeding back and sort of communicating that to the brain, which is helping that whole feedback loop and regulation of appetite and so on. So I think, again, you often find, and it was really nice to hear your accounts, the two of you, because what you find is anecdotally people do that anyway, without knowing the science behind it, without knowing the reasons why that works. Obviously they find strategies that work for them, which has scientific backing. So milk, yogurt, small meals, thinking about when you're going to have that drink. Like, you wouldn't have masses of volume before you need to do prayer, because that would not be handled correctly, so you end up going to the toilet, all of that will be flushed out, you know. So things like that are things to think about. So it's not to say this is a scientific way of doing it, it's more to say the science backs your strategies that you find work. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, massively. Thank you, Adam. And I think even just touching on that, so a question came in from, I think it's Ashley, yeah, because I remember Ashley from the last call. Ashley said that I heard that coconut water is amazing during Ramadan as it's really hydrating. Would this be the norm for a lot of people, or would this even be something that you'd recommend as a doctor?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those ones that is better than water, so it's actually going to be absorbed, handled better than just plain water. So again, in terms of hydration, that's why athletes have started to use it, because it's like a natural sports drink essentially, which is more efficiently getting that fluid on board, right, which is great. And obviously it's got some electrolytes in it, which is necessary as well, because it's not just about the fluid that you're losing if you're dehydrated, it's all those natural minerals that is also coming out of you in urine and sweat, which you need to replace as well. Even more reason why just thinking of the fluid and the water is forgetting all of that. You need to either combine that with food or have something that has other things in it as a drink.
No, absolutely. And do either of you, Mariam or Asim, like have those, like, I guess, other kind of fluids that you try and take on? I know Asim, you mentioned milk. Is there anything else that you guys have tried or are doing at the moment?
No, for me, it's always just been, since for as long as I can remember, it's like a combination of milk and water. I feel like when you just have water, it ends up disappearing pretty quickly, and you feel no different really. Whereas milk tends to hydrate me for a bit longer, perhaps. I don't know if that's scientifically proven, but that's kind of the feeling that we get, or the feeling that I get when I've broken fast. And it's also one of those things where I don't feel like you can make up for the amount of water that you would have drunk during the day. So it's not a case of, I've missed 8 glasses through the day. So between the hours that I'm awake of sunsets to sunrise, sorry, it's not a case of me just having those 8 glasses spread across that time, as that hasn't really done anything either. So I guess during those hours, I think the best sort of advice that I've given to myself is listen to your body. There's some days where you might feel like having loads, there's some days where you might feel like having a little bit, but it's kind of just what gets you through. And I think I've learned from whatever 10 plus years of fasting that there's no real hard and fast rule. There's no set formula. Every year it feels like I'm doing something different or trying to like tweak something. So, but I think it's Imi's just said in the chat, food and drink is such a small part of our month, such a small part of Ramadan itself. So one thing I'd love to get into a little bit is if those physiological changes that we see affect our mental state at all. So is there any way of having a reduction in the food and the drink throughout the day? Do you see any short-term effects during the day itself? So I play sports, so it's interesting you touched on that earlier, Stephen. I still try and play sports throughout the month of Ramadan, and I do feel very different when I do play sports. I'm visibly more tired. I feel more tired afterwards. But during the actual exercise, I don't know whether it's the adrenaline or anything, but you seem okay. You feel like you're able to do it. So, I don't know if we can add any colour to that.
Have you done any work on that, Adam? I'm recalling back many, and this is many moons ago, decades ago, sadly, when we were doing work. Remember, with it turned out to be a very famous sport drink, and we were looking at performance and alertness and electrolytes up in the school when you were doing your masters. Is there anything, to Asim's point, around sort of is performance not affected? Cognition, is that something that's been studied? There's a wee bit of research I'll pop in the chat later around physical, like VO2 max and things like that around Ramadan. But on the point of fluid and management of that and the restricted eating patterns, is there anything to suggest that isn't in moon astronauts and spacemen, which is where some of the stuff is coming out of, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think that what you described there makes perfect sense to me, because if you are fasting, in whatever form you're fasting, then the thing that you're depleting, the thing that's sort of being depleted and repleted all the time, is your carbohydrate stores, your glycogen stores. So when you're doing exercise and you're obviously needing to tap into those, that can be a pathway to fatigue. That could make you feel more tired. But during the exercise itself, obviously you've got that fight or flight response, which is basically what exercise is. And your body is very resilient. I mean, this is the thing that people worry about fasting, whether it's this form of fasting, other form of fasting, as if it's like something's going to kill your body. And the scare stories came in the newspapers only this week about that. But your body's incredibly resilient. It can cope with that very well. And it will just dip into different resources. It's got other means to be able to supply that energy. Now, whether you're going to be in, you're not going to be in a state of ketosis. And people talk about ketosis and fasting. That's not what's going to happen during a form of fasting like Ramadan. But nonetheless, you are going to be using fat as a fuel more. You are going to be using some ketones for energy. You are going to be able to dip into those sort of reserves as well. So you will still be able to sustain that work, that effort. You might not be able to do an ultra marathon during Ramadan, but you would be able to do, like, play a game of tennis or squash or whatever it is. You'd be able to, or do a session down the gym. That's all possible, because your body's able to adapt to that. And some arguments could say that actually the fact that you are in that, doing that during a period of sort of intermittent fasting, that you're almost amplifying the effects of that exercise, because you're creating a bigger stress and your body's having to adapt and come back stronger. That's basically the premise of exercise training, is your body becomes more resilient as a consequence of a challenge. So again, that's in keeping with lots of research now around deliberately refraining from feeding around exercise to amplify the effects of that exercise, which might involve exercising in a fasted state, or exercising without feeding, or refraining from feeding either before or after that exercise. So like I said, all these things that you're describing, you can justify from the evidence that comes from different studies.
I was going to say, Mariam, how does that, I guess, resonate with you, especially someone who's like not only on her feet all day, but you mentioned you also train as well, and the training doesn't stop during Ramadan. So how do you feel like your body actually feels? Does it feel like any different? Like, do you feel like, like you're getting through, like maybe with a bit of adrenaline like Asim does, but then there's a bit of fatigue later on, or like as Dr. Collins was mentioning earlier, like your body just kind of powers through it?
Well, I used to go swimming before Ramadan, but obviously because it's Ramadan, I'm not going swimming because of the water and the water getting in your mouth and stuff. And then I also used to go sauna and steam room. So obviously because I'm dehydrated anyway, I've stopped going sauna and steam room. But I've stopped training for a bit. I've been going gym. Gym I've been all right with, but I used to do cage fighting. And when I was training, oh my God, when I would tell you, I was exhausted because you do jiu-jitsu and you're striking. And especially the jiu-jitsu wasn't as bad because it's more groundwork. But when you're doing your striking, you're doing your kicks and your punches, I was gone. And then I've got my coach. He was like, yeah, come on, you can go faster. I was like, listen, I'm fasting, leave me alone. I can only go as fast as I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't like a major difference, but obviously I was a lot more tired because I couldn't drink water as well. So yeah.
And you were mentioning about BCAAs, that you were taking that as a drink.
It's it's the brand. It's called Knockout, and it's called there's a franchise of different types, but the one that I take, it's got no caffeine in it and no sugar in it, and that's the one that I found has helped me quite a bit, to be honest.
And when do you take that? Do you take that like in the morning or when?
No, it's when I open my fast. So it's before I go to my prayers.
Okay. I mean, BCAA are an interesting one. They've obviously got a lot of attention from people that do a lot of exercise and athletes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're obviously amino acids and they do provide that aspect of it, but there's some interesting work, or originally a lot of the research was around the effect they have on fatigue and performance, that they actually have a dampening effect on fatigue, and they can actually reduce what they call central fatigue, because they can actually be taken up by the brain and sort of prevent that low energy state in the brain. They could actually contribute to that sort of alertness side of it, or that perceived exertion aspect, which is why it's often used as a pre-workout for that reason, but also because you're adding amino acids which you could dip into immediately after exercise, particularly if you're doing something high intensity or resistance type exercise. So I'd be interested, maybe that's helping you with your more high intensity stuff that you're doing. It sounds like your sort of training would be depleting your glycogen stores, but at least you're giving yourself something that keeps you going.
Yeah, because when we're going for evening prayers, it's about 2 hours. Luckily, the mosques that I go to, they've got air conditioning, so it's all right. But it does get really hot, and it's trying to stay awake as well, because like I said, they're approximately 2 hours long. So I find it helps me massively drinking it before I've gone to my prayers, because I'm more alert and I'm more awake, and like I seem to be falling half asleep while I'm praying.
Yeah, oh, great.
No, 100%. And I think even just that alertness, Imi's made another good comment about, like, she personally feels that you become more alert and your performance improves rather than deteriorating. And I wanted to kind of segue that into more of like the workspace, because I think like one of the, I guess, stereotypes would have been in previous years that if you've got a Muslim colleague in your team, it's sort of a bit like, woe is me, or a bit of like pity to be like, okay, you're fasting, so like, do I need to do this, do I need to do that? But actually, like, you could have some cases where people actually perform better in their working environment because they're actually fasting, because they're more sharp and more alert. So I wanted to bring in, like, again, Richard, again, like, for in terms of thinking on the workspace, especially with like our health, safety and well-being, kind of operations with the field and in the desk, like how we can kind of focus on supporting our colleagues in the best way during this holy month.
No, absolutely. Bear with me. I haven't plugged my computer in. I don't want to lose you halfway through the nuggets of information. Just 1 second. Oh, there we go. We're plugged in. No, I think you've absolutely hit on the sort of historical view, was that, you know, individuals could be, you know, unsafe, could collapse, could, you know, become incapacitated, you know, performance and resilience, as in being able to complete a whole shift, are significantly affected. And what I like, Marion, you sort of really summed it up. You said this is your, I think, your 14th year. You know, you have spent a number of years refining, you know, how you do this, and that ability to manage it, you know, is much more recognized than, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, even, where, you know, we would have said, you know, avoid doing any sort of work at height or safety critical work or anything like that. You know, I don't know if that's something, as you've gone through the years, you've found, you know, you're much more in tune with how you need to manage it and how your body manages and reacts.
Yeah, it's like I was saying to Asim before, like way back, the fasts were a lot longer. Like you said, they wasn't open till 10:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock. They were quite late, and after that, we had our evening prayers. We wasn't getting home till like 1 o'clock in the morning. So obviously, as the years have gone back, as we go off a lunar calendar, and Ramadan goes back 2 weeks every year, is it, Asim? Roughly?
Yeah, 11 days to 2 weeks. So
around roughly, it goes back 2 weeks every year. So I've just found, as the years have gone on and you've been the months have changed and the timings have changed, it has gone a lot more easier than it was before, when we were doing longer fasts. And it's just about bracing yourself and mentally preparing yourself, and obviously without the food and water as well, it's just about reflecting on who you are as a person and like building your relationship with God and bringing all the religion aspect into it as well. And especially in our religion, when we're making food, we tend to give food to all the neighbors and stuff, or family come over and everyone gets together. So that's a massive part of it as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a much wider recognition around, you know, the needs to be flexible. So flexible working patterns, extra breaks, watching, you know, as you say, because I was reflecting on that and I was like, I'm sure I dealt with this, gosh, about 10, 15 years ago. And it was right in the, you know, the start of summer. And we had, you know, really to consider quite carefully in the safety critical business I was working in at the time around managing like real heat. And I thought, although we've spoken about it being nice and warm today, it would have been right in the height of the summer months,
Yeah.
and the long days and the sleep, you know, the sleep disruption because of all of the activities. And I think what we recommend, and certainly our people managers and our team leads are great at, is being flexible, putting extra breaks in, watching when it's extremely warm. So for colleagues that are maybe outside of the UK, you know, sort of watching being out in direct heat, doing those dynamic risk assessments that you do if you're out in the field anyway, and managing your workload. As I posted in the side chat, the sort of physical parameters, so the safety to do, you know, safety to climb, safety to, you know, do the cable pulls. And I've just been out with the team in Edinburgh, Mariam. That is a hard job if you're not using the machine that they're piloting. It is a hard physical upper body stamina. Now you're cage fighting, so you're going to be fine with that. But you know, the actual pushing through and the fatigue that you can build. So again, it's planning that in and planning for success, and that's for our colleagues that are doing the fast on that regular basis. And I hope you've felt and seen that over the time, Mariam, that you've been here.
Yeah.
And the guide. And then we've also got colleagues that may be wanting to do fasting as an ally. So there's been a fasting challenge the last 2 or 3 years. And again, as we start to build more understanding, more knowledge, we don't have the advantage of people practicing it and being able to refine it over many years. But I think what we're definitely seeing is people doing sort of short periods and then breaking the fast when they feel they need to. And I think the main thing with the fasting challenge is they're leaning into what the purpose and the reasons for doing the fast are, rather than not eating the whole time. And I really love to see that. And I think the guidance from the safety reviews that we've done is, you know, be aware, be mindful, you know, have snacks and drinks available if you are someone who's not used to it, or circumstances, work, or weather impacts adversely on that. But what I'm pleased to see is I think we're becoming more understanding and more able to articulate how to understand, identify, and manage the risk. So on both sides, I think we manage a really nice balance. But certainly in our colleagues that follow the fast through the whole period, we do give that flexibility, and that for me is the key adjustment. If there's any others, Mariam, Stephen, that you've seen or in the chat, it'd be great to hear. Or things that haven't worked, and we'll take that back into the guidance.
First side note is that you've amazingly given the opportunity to plug our Fast with a Friend challenge that we're doing tomorrow, literally in collaboration with the BT Muslim Network. So that fasting challenge, like encouraging all colleagues to fast for the day, with our Muslim colleagues, and then break the fast together, which actually, as guys have been mentioning, it'll be really nice this year because the fast breaks a lot earlier. So normally, like, we would host the iftar maybe like around 8 or 9 o'clock, because it'd be quite late. So of course not everyone could join because of different commitments. But today, like this time, the fast will be like breaking the fast will be around, I'm not sure specifically, but towards like the end of the working day, basically when people will be logging off anyway, about 6:30 tomorrow. Yeah, exactly. So it will actually be a time where people, like more of us, can actually come together, gather. There'll be, like, for those who are in like the different kind of strategic sites, they can also gather together as well, and we've kind of set that up as well. So thank you, Richard, for helping us to plug that as well, because that would be a really good day.
And it's
tomorrow.
been it's been great to work on it, and as you'll see, the guidance, you know, we didn't just lift and shift lazily that guidance, which it is from last year, but the guidance is the same. Can't fight the website's a bit clunky on the Society of OM, but we as professionals contributed into that. So they did a call from, you know, my colleagues in the railway, my colleagues at British Airways, both from flight crew, cabin crew, and our colleagues on the ground, which were the colleagues that I used to manage our engineering and pushback teams and baggage handlers. So a number of us sort of inputted into this guidance, and what was great is the research that we were able to identify, or the team, it wasn't me, don't want to take the credit for that, showed that, you know, some of the assumptions and the risk averse was probably a little more, and that goes for any potential incapacitation. So I think it's great that we continue to support it and embed it further, but particularly around the journey about why, rather than I'm just not going to eat for 6 hours, we're actually getting into the reasons behind it, which is great. And I think that's a big shift in I think it's 3 years this has been running now. This is the 3rd year, and we've not had any significant issues.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think even just understanding that reason behind, because everyone's reason will be slightly different, even though like it's underpinned by, let's say, one religion, but everyone's specific nuances of their reasoning will be like a little bit different. And that's where I think as an umbrella, it comes down to that allyship of actually understanding each individual colleague, whether you're a people manager or whether it's someone just alongside you as a colleague. I think that's the best way in terms of supporting our colleagues like through the month of Ramadan and after and before. It's just understanding them as an individual to say that, okay, I'm not just going to blanket, like put a blanket over you to be like, okay, you're fasting, so I'm going to treat you in this way. But actually like having that conversation, understanding, okay, what are your specifics, what are your considerations that we'll need to think about for this specific month. And if your case is actually like nothing, I'm just going to carry on as normal and there's going to be no effect, or as we said earlier, I'm actually going to do a bit better actually. So expect a few better results. Like it could be anything, but I think just understanding your people specifically, I think breeds that allyship.
We need to stop telling people that it makes us more alert and more focused, because now they're going to start giving us more work. Do you know what I mean?
I think for me personally, I find it a bit harder working out in the field. Like I've done it before at a different company, so it's a bit difficult because it's with the mosques, they're more catered towards men and not women. So for me, sometimes I find it difficult to find facilities where I can pray or where I can do ablution, things like that. So I'll have to kind of like, I don't want to be driving 20-30 minutes to the only mosque that caters for women, because obviously I work around Lancashire and it's quite a big area and we cover all different towns and stuff. So in that aspect, that's the only part I find difficult while I'm working, just trying to find somewhere to pray or, like I said, to do ablution and things like that.
No, so true. And I know, Richard, you touched on that earlier in terms of like what the business is trying to do to kind of overcome that, even outside of Ramadan as well, for especially for our female colleagues who I know suffer quite a lot. Yeah, 100%.
I don't really know that many Muslim females that are out in the field, that mostly are just lads, and the lads can go to the mosque because, like I said, they cater towards more men than they do women. So I don't really know any other like female Muslim engineer that would be in that same predicament.
No, it's true. And yeah, Richard, I don't know if you have any kind of immediate insights into some of the things the business has been doing, like just to kind of shed a bit more light on some of the steps that we're trying to take forward as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly looking at the barriers, Mario, and hearing and listening and working with, you know, our different colleagues across all areas of the business, and really looking at how we can, you know, because as you flexibility, but you're still driving, you know, an hour round trip, which is not great. And looking at how, when we build our better workplace buildings and we transform the exchanges, you know, how we can sort of build some of these controls in for out of Ramadan season, as you know, period as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Marilyn, I didn't know if you were going to respond, if you would. No, that's all right. I wanted to highlight before we move on to a bit of a Q&A. Imi's made a really good comment, which is like, we're grateful to have a meal at the end of our fast, but the thought also goes to those that don't even have that benefit willingly or unwillingly around the world, as they still survive as well. And I think charity, has, I'm sure Asim, you could probably even touch on, is a massive part of like the faith of a Muslim as well. So I think that's something that's definitely highlighted a lot more during Ramadan.
Yeah, I think massively as well. I'm no expert, but one thing that I can definitely speak on is how it connects you definitely to your Lord and to your faith. I feel as though food oftentimes makes us incredibly lazy, and we often neglect big parts of our faith, such as thinking about others. You know, a big part of my day is walking to the office, walking to Tesco to get myself a meal deal, and that's the first thing on my mind. And in these times, especially, you get half an hour or 15 minutes just to have that think, and realize how lucky and grateful you are to have that on tap, because not everyone is as fortunate. So like Imi says, it's such a small part of our month, giving up our food and religion, giving up our food and our drink, sorry. And yeah, there's so much more to it. I think making space for additional prayers, making space for additional mindfulness is something which we as Muslims try to link more closer to. And I think, yeah, it's really important as well. Like you say, everyone experiences it differently. And charity is such a huge part of our religion, of course. So it often gives a lot of people a time to reflect and realize, a lot of people, one of our pillars in Islam is the zakat. So it's giving away a portion of your salary. And a lot of people usually use Ramadan as a time to calculate that across the whole year, and just a time for reflection. So it is seen as a period of charity also. One thing which, if you ever attended an iftar, and I hope many of you get to go and see the community iftars or events that we're breaking fast together, you'll see there's such a big onus put on sharing as well. You'll see groups of people who haven't eaten for the whole day be passing over their date to the person next to them, rather than snatching the one off the plate and taking it for themselves. So it's seen as such an amazing part of our faith. And it's sad that it takes us have to have a month in the year for this all to come out, but it's like I say, it's a fantastic chance to reset, and we get that opportunity. So yeah.
Well,
No.
where I live, we have a WhatsApp group, so it's all just a local area, and there's over like 700 people in it. So what they do is, when they've got food left over, rather than it going in the bin, they'll put all that. It's all halal food, so they'll put all the food in. Oh, this is what we've got, and then people just collect it. So rather than just going in the bin, they'll just put up, we've got all this food, and everyone just put loads of food in it, and people pick it up like that from the house.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that should be replicated as much as possible, because as we know in this country as well, and I think in a lot of the Western world, that there is like a big food wastage kind of problem, and especially like when there's people suffering when they absolutely shouldn't be, like that's the kind of like small thing that can go a long way in that sense as well. Time is coming short. Well, being spent quite fast. So I wanted to open up to the audience just in case there was anyone who wanted to make a comment, come off mute, to like kind of say anything or ask any kind of questions, just while we do have the live audience with us. If not, we do have some pre-submitted questions that I can go to as well. I see Jamil and I see another hand. I'll go with Jamil first and Sonia after that as well.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you all for your participation in this. It's been really insightful. My internet's been horrible, so that's why I haven't come on camera. I devised like 5 questions. I was like, I'm gonna give them really difficult questions, and then you know what? You guys just tick them off one by one. So I've only been left with 1 out of my 5 that I spent a lot of time on. But yeah, so my question to the panel would be, what is your ideal, scientifically backed iftar and suhoor? Like, what would your go-to meals be? Like, literally, if you say 3 eggs, a cup of milk, or whatever, specifics, what would your go-to meals be? Or even like the generality of it. Yeah, that's my question to the panel anyway.
That one's for the experts. That one's for the experts.
Adam, it'd be great to hear from you, but then I'd love to hear from Asim and Mariam about how aligned are they to, the optimal, gold podium creating men's health cover adorning.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's like, what is the perfect diet, isn't it? That's like a $6 million question. But I suppose there is some logic to say that not to just overindulge, particularly on very sweet, very fatty foods, would be the thing to avoid. And in terms of a perfect food, maybe something, given the sort of experiences that I've heard, maybe something that's relatively small in size, or something that is broken down into smaller parts that you can take over a period of time, rather than one big, huge meal. And maybe you just want to have something which is giving you some good quality protein. Obviously, fluid, we said, is a major priority, and that fluid is coming not just from what you're drinking, but also what you're eating as well. People forget that those 8 glasses of water a day that everyone seems to hang themselves on is including that in food. So things like fruit and vegetables are obviously going to be a contributor to fluid as well. So yeah, some lean protein, whatever form that might be. Maybe grilled chicken was an example that was made that people have, or whether that's sort of in sort of the samosa form, and some fruit and vegetables to go with that, but not carb laden. Not lots of carbs, lots of rich sauces. Try and avoid that, I would say, in that breaking fast meal. And that's because you're just not able to cope with that amount and insult, I would say, to the system. I don't know if that answers your question, because it's a bit woolly, but I think there's some, rather than give you specific foods, just some guidelines would be useful.
No, that does cover it. And the reason why I actually asked, obviously, I've been doing this for a while, so I kind of know, but I thought it'd be really helpful for some of the colleagues that are joining us tomorrow, just to hear the do's and don'ts as opposed to specific foods. I just thought I'll just be cheeky and try to get a few specifics out of you, just for the sake of it, if I'm honest with you. But yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
No, thank you, Jamil. And then we'll go to Sonia just to close us. Sonia, welcome.
Hi. Thanks a lot for the overview. I hope I'm not going to be too much of an imposter, because I'm not of Islamic faith, but I'm a concerned mother, and my son do the fasting and the Ramadan. So I was just taking this opportunity while there is some doctor on the call, just to have your view of what could be the consequences health-wise for a teenager doing the fasting during the Ramadan. Is there any consequence on their growth, or is, because it's such a small period of time, it's okay in their development? It's just like, when you're a teenager, you eat so much, especially as a boy.
Yeah.
So I know that could be, I don't know if that's in a long term. Obviously, I can see some grown-up men, so obviously it's not, but I'm just concerned and just wanted to have a medical kind of view on that, if that's okay.
No, thank you, Sonia. Really good question.
Adam, any sort of research on, I guess it's sort of diets in adolescence, more around the content, I guess, and the maybe it's coming from slightly more unpleasant sort of eating disorder type place and growth. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Not to open that box, but that's probably,
Yeah.
there's probably some research from those groups which sadly are not uncommon.
I think that you're right, Richard. I suppose from a question of growth, one of the things that you can look at it as a good or a bad thing, depending on your circumstances, is that often people end up losing a bit of weight, for example, during Ramadan, because their overall consumption of food goes down. Now, from a teenager's point of view, where you're in this period of sort of accelerated growth or development, that could become an issue. But like I said, it is a temporary situation. It's not something that you're doing permanently. So whether that's going to create any permanent damage, I don't recall seeing anything to say that it's like detrimental to growth and development because you're doing it every year. But it's more around, like Richard saying, not the fact you've got to sort of cram loads of calories into that period where you're breaking the fast, but again, think about the nutrition quality of the food that you're having, in terms of the protein sources in particular, things like calcium sources, some energy coming from carbohydrate, yes, but not lots of processed food that's high in saturated fat, high in sugar, very you will look at the diet quality as much as anything else.
Okay.
But you're quite...
Sorry, carry on.
No, you can carry on, Richard.
No, it's good. Any optimization about, sort of certain kind of vitamin, not necessarily tablet supplements, but like vitamin K and green produce, magnesium. Is there anything in that sort of, as Sonia said, in that sort of teenage group? Because it's not just a one-day event, it's a number of weeks. And is there any, I guess, sort of deficiencies that we're starting to see in population health, so into the public health side of things that we need to be, maybe you mentioned vitamin D, but is there foods containing X, Y, and Z that Sonia should try and sneak in or really push hard that he needs to take?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything like a target nutrient to focus on so much. I mean, again, it's like about, that's what you're looking for when you look at diet quality. You want to look at something that's contributing a range of nutrients across the board. I mean, things like iron, calcium, protein to some extent will be quite useful, and particularly for females, because that's where a period where they're starting to lay down peak bone growth. So you want to make sure that you've got that that energy. Yes, okay, you might be compromised potentially, but you're providing that calcium, that like maybe vitamin D as well, of course, and you're providing good quality food that you're supplying. I wouldn't say that there's any call to do particular supplements. I mean, most people would say take a vitamin D supplement anyway, because a lot of people are suboptimal in vitamin D anyway, and that's probably going to be amplified if you're doing some form of fast. So it's almost like what you come into that fast with might be exacerbated when you're doing the fast. So it's almost like looking at more globally, not just during the fast, but how good is the diet overall anyway. That's a cop-out answer, I know, but
very good. Thanks a lot.
I just want to touch up on what Imi said. Imi's put in the chat that he's been fasting since he was in primary school, but I've got a little sister who's 9, and she fasts on weekends out of choice because she wants to, because she sees family members doing it. So she wants to fast as well, and she's 9 years old. And my other cousin, he's a similar age, and he's autistic as well, but he wants to fast as well. So I don't personally feel there's any major consequences of that someone fasting, because it's not as though you're continuously starving yourself for a number amount of days. You're still getting food and water in between them hours that you're allowed to eat and drink.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Sorry, what we
No, I was just going to say the other point I was going to say, which is just a word of caution, which is about something that Richard mentioned about disordered eating, that if you are susceptible to that, and it's not a cause and effect, it's like a chicken and egg situation when you think of things around intermittent fasting or fasting like this, is that if you've got traits of that, then it can exacerbate those practices of fasting. But I think the evidence is more around prolonged fasting, when you're doing something like the 5-2 rather than time restricted eating. But of course, anything that, if you've got traits of disordered eating and you're enforcing rules of restriction in a diet, then of course you need to be a little bit cautious is all. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, thank you guys all for sharing. We have run over time, but I think the validity of the last couple of questions was definitely worth kind of sticking around for. So thank you to our live audience who have stuck around with us, and massive thank you to our panelists. So Asim, Mariam, Dr. Collins, and Dr. Caddis. Thank you all for your time, for your insights, and just for your heart and sharing your like kind of real life experiences. It's been a really amazing discussion. As mentioned, we will have our Fast with a Friend kind of challenge happening tomorrow across the whole day, and then breaking the fast with our live event with the BT Muslim Network towards the evening, so around kind of 6:30ish, we'll be kicking that off as well. And then, as I mentioned in the chat as well, that this podcast is recorded, so we'll be putting the replay live on our EDM Workplace page and also on our Tackling Taboos podcast page on YouTube. So yeah, for those who weren't able to tune in live to the discussion, you can listen back as well.